News Center, President Park Geun-hye and visiting French President Francois Hollande agreed to strengthen bilateral cooperation in sectors ranging from North Korea to tech sharing. The nation's parliament remains crippled for the second day as the main opposition party continues to boycott parliamentary sessions over the government's decision to author history textbooks for school children. And the U.S.-China showdown over the South China Sea spill over to a gathering of Southeast Asian defense chiefs. A joint statement is scrapped. Seoul and Beijing agreed to install more hotlines. It's Wednesday, November 4th, 2015. Good evening to our viewers in Korea. Hello to those around the world. I'm Moon Conn-young. President Park Geun-hye met with visiting French President Francois Hollande at the nation's top office on this Wednesday. Hollande is on a two-day state visit to Korea, and the summit comes as the two countries try to expand cooperation ahead of the 130th anniversary of diplomatic ties next year. Our Hwang Sang-hee joins us from Seoul's presidential office of Cheongwadae. Now, Sang-hee, do you have details on the French president's visit to Seoul?
Conn-young, this is President Hollande's first visit to Korea since taking office, and he was greeted with grand celebrations. But of course, the most important event of the day was his summit with President Park. Now here, the two leaders adopted an action plan outlining 11 specific goals for boosting bilateral cooperation in diverse areas. Seeking specific ways for further cooperation. That's exactly what President Park Geun-hye and French President Francois Hollande did during Wednesday's summit. For one, Korea and France will jointly work on finding new growth engines through bolstered cooperation in innovative technology. As part of the plan, the so-called French Tech Hub, a French institution that supports startups, will open a Seoul office next year. A new MOU promises expanded cooperation in space issues, such as satellite navigation and space exploration. The two countries have long been partners in this area, with France taking part in the opening of Korea's first spaceport, the NATO Space Center. Another key agreement is on more exchanges of broadcast material and content. For that, Korea will support Korean global channels, Arirang TV and KBS World, to expand programming in the French market, while Korea will support the French networks, France 24 and TV5 Style in Seoul. Arirang TV has led the spread of Hallyu, or the Korean wave, in the European nation by reaching out to French viewers since December 2005. And these are just some of the agreements reached at today's summit. The two leaders also agreed to set up a strategic dialogue channel between their two foreign ministries to follow up on the action plan that was adopted today. Conn-young?
Thank you, Sang-hee, for that. Now we're learning the specifics of the Korean government's plan to publish history textbooks to be used in the nation's middle and high schools starting 2017. As more details are released, more resistance at the nation's National Assembly. Arirang's parliamentary correspondent Park Ji-won has this report.
The National Institute of Korean History, which is entrusted by the Education Ministry to put the new textbook together, says the new government-issued history textbook will be based on the Constitution and facts.
As the nation's most specialized research center in Korean history, the Institute once again pledges to put our best efforts into making a textbook that helps students establish a correct perspective on history.
Stressing that scholars with outstanding achievements will only participate in the project, the Institute says the names of over 30 historians who will be joining the project will be finalized later this month. The Institute plans on completing the new textbook by November 2016, with the books being introduced to students from March 2017. However, the opposition bloc strongly resists the plan. The NPAD's leader Moon Jae-in slammed the government for unilaterally forging ahead with its plan, ignoring what he said is the public's growing demand that the plan be scrapped. Calling the government's move totalitarian, he urged the public to reject the state-issued textbook.
I hope the people engage in acts of civil disobedience to protect liberal democracy. Please do say no to the authorities' arrogance and lack of communications.
The Liberal Party's leader vowed to stop the government by joining hands with civil organizations. Moon said from this moment, the NPAD is in this fight for the long haul. He said the party now plans to make use of all legal means available to it, such as filing a constitutional complaint and for a provisional injunction to stop the Education Ministry's move. The Liberal Party is concerned the textbook might be too right-leaning and gloss over South Korea's dictatorial past, while the conservative ruling Saenuri Party argues most current history textbooks are too left-leaning and their descriptions on North Korea are too lenient and skewed. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
And the bipartisan standoff over the state-authored history textbooks has brought the National Assembly to a halt. Opposition party lawmakers have boycotted the Budget and Accounts Committee meeting that was to review next year's budget for non-economy-related ministries. Well, the rival parties must complete the review and agree on modifications by November 30th. 5 other standing committees that were scheduled to open today have been pushed back. A definite sign of heightening tensions over the South China Sea. The third ASEAN defense ministers meeting in Kuala Lumpur has, for the first time in the meeting's history, failed to produce a joint statement. And on the sidelines of that meeting, Seoul and Beijing agreed to install more military hotlines. Our defense ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports from Kuala Lumpur.
South Korea's Defense Minister Han Min-gu held talks with his Chinese counterpart on the last day of the 2-day meeting here in Kuala Lumpur, and the two agreed to bolster bilateral defense cooperation. The two agreed to install 2 additional military hotlines in both Navy and Air Force, respectively, to better prevent military accidents and have smoother transaction with its military branches. Defense chiefs of Seoul and Beijing also agreed to speed up the process in setting up hotlines in both countries' ministries. Meanwhile, as ASEAN nations rally against China's continued building of artificial islands in the area, those attending the ASEAN Defense Ministers' ADMM Plus failed to sign a joint statement on the matter, despite the furor it has raised between Beijing and Washington. The meeting comprises 10 ASEAN nations and 8 dialogue partners, including Korea, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia. China is territorially claiming most of the South China Sea, through which over $5 trillion of global trade passes each year. Half of the ASEAN members, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, Taiwan, and the Philippines, have rival claims to the area. Also at the meeting, Korea's Defense Minister Han Min-gu raised the importance of denuclearizing North Korea and countering Pyongyang's nuclear and missile threats.
At the general meeting, I addressed Korea's unification policy as well as the importance of denuclearizing North Korea. Several countries strongly agreed on denuclearizing Pyongyang.
After the general meeting, Minister Han also held talks with his Indonesian and Malaysian counterparts about ways to enhance bilateral defense cooperation with their respective countries. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Kuala Lumpur.
So what exactly is going on over the South China Sea? Well, in a move likely to strengthen its military control, Beijing has been building artificial islands and claiming sovereignty over the disputed region, which it calls a legacy from China's ancestors. Now, Washington does not acknowledge such sovereignty and continues to patrol the area with warships. As our Song Ji-sun reports, it doesn't seem like this chain of reactions will end anytime soon.
Although China and the U.S. are not members, these invited guests created a bigger buzz at this year's ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus Summit. Beijing lobbied to remove reference to South China Sea out of the joint declaration, which resulted in no final accord, as some ASEAN members saw it as inappropriate. China sticks to its long-time argument that the South China Sea islands and adjacent waters have been China's territory ever since ancient times, and a legacy from their ancestors. Washington, on its part, argues that China is militarizing island formations and coral reefs, not by just building artificial islands through massive dredging operations, but also by setting up military outposts on the mostly uninhabited islands. Last Tuesday, the USS Lassen, a guided missile destroyer, passed through a 12 nautical mile limit around Subi Reef in the Spratly Archipelago, one of the 7 that China has artificially reinforced to support its sovereignty claims. The U.S. Navy plans even more patrols, pledging it will conduct similar operations in the future. U.S. Defense Minister Ashton Carter is also set to board a U.S. carrier to patrol the South China Sea after the defense ministers' meeting in Kuala Lumpur on Thursday. Calling such patrol a provocation, China warns the U.S. not to threaten its sovereignty, but the U.S. answers that it is committed to its right to freely navigate in international waters. 송지선, Arirang News.
"38 North is a program of the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University dedicated to providing analysis of events in and around North Korea. Their blog is authored by its faculty and guest commentators, including Dr. Rudiger Frank, a longtime North Korea expert and a professor of East Asian Studies at the University of Vienna. Dr. Frank was educated at Kim Il-sung University in North Korea and has been visiting the reclusive state for the past 24 years. Well, I recently had a chance to sit down with him. I started by asking him whether bilateral relations between China and North Korea remain strong.
China's geopolitical interests have not changed at all. For them, North Korea is still an important country. In many ways, it's a buffer zone. It's part of the Korean Peninsula. It's a place where they actually compete with the Americans. It's also a place where China is showing off to other countries around how it treats an ally, which is why they can't pressurize the North Koreans too much. On the other hand, China is trying to become a responsible member of the international community. So of course they do have to, every once in a while, voice some criticism about the North Korean nuclear program and human rights. And besides, China is very concerned about the nuclear program because I believe that actually the main target of North Korea's nuclear program is China. China is the biggest threat to North Korea. The biggest physical threat. I mean, it's a big country right next to North Korea. There's a border, 1,400 kilometers. So if any country wanted to invade North Korea, it would be the easiest thing to do for China. More than 90% of North Korea's trade is with China. So North Korea is totally dependent economically on the Chinese. And as you know, that makes them feel very uncomfortable. And they don't want the Chinese to use that power that they've got. And having nuclear weapons is one option of preventing the Chinese from actually exercising the power that they've got. I think it's more or less our Western self-centeredness that we believe whatever the North Koreans do is about us. But if you look at it realistically, no, I think the nuclear weapons are as much meant to deter China as they are to deter Japan and the United States.
North Korea's nuclear program, your prospects on that?
Well, it's pretty obvious that the North Koreans will not give up the nuclear program anytime soon, because it's the reason why we are talking about it. In other words, that's why people are interested in North Korea. Otherwise, it would just be another dictatorship somewhere at the end of the world, from a Western perspective at least. But thanks to the nuclear program, it is elevated to that status. It's one of the few successes that the North Korean leadership can present to its own people. So why should they trade it away? Now it got even worse because it's the kind of what Kim Jong-il passed down to his son Kim Jong-un. So how can Kim Jong-un then easily give it away? What we can do, however, and this is what frustrates me a little bit, because not much is happening, rather than talking about the North Koreans dismantling the whole nuclear program at once, why aren't we talking about non-proliferation? Why aren't we talking about nuclear security, like preventing an accident like it happened even in Fukushima in highly developed Japan? And these are issues that the North Koreans are willing to talk about. I spoke to them. They signaled very strongly that, yes, of course, we can talk about these things. But as long as we start every meeting by saying, first you have to completely denuclearize, I don't think we will achieve any progress on those quite essential issues.
So your opinion is that the rest of the world should go about progressing talks with North Korea upon consent that North Korea is a nuclear weapon state?
The problem is that we said publicly we were never going to do that. So in a way we dug a hole for ourselves and now we don't know how to get out of it. That's always a problem. And as a scholar, it's not my job to find a diplomatic or political way out of that hole. But all I can say is that I don't believe it will lead us, it will help us to pursue this all or nothing strategy. I think we should look at issues that can be resolved and that are still in our interest, like non-proliferation and nuclear security.
North Korea has denied entry of 2 South Koreans into the Inter-Korean Joint Industrial Complex located in the North Korean border town of Kaesong. Seoul's Unification Ministry says Pyongyang officially denied the entry of 2 men on Tuesday, one of whom a vice chairman of Seoul's management committee for that complex. The North claims that the 2 South Koreans were against the regime's stance. Seoul, in response, called on Pyongyang to retract its decision as it is in clear violation of an inter-Korean agreement that guarantees South Korean workers a safe and swift access to the complex at any time. The operation at the Kaesong Industrial Complex is viewed as the only remaining symbol of cross-border ties and is often swayed when tensions run high on the Korean peninsula. 66 years, that's how long it took for the presidents of China and Taiwan to sit together in one room. The two will hold a historic summit in Singapore on Saturday, but with no joint agreement or statement expected, some analysts believe that the bilateral meeting will not generate any specific results, at least something practical. Won Ji-hyun shares with us various scenarios of this meeting.
Promoting peaceful development across the Taiwan Straits will be the main agenda item for a summit between Taiwan's President Ma Ying-jeou and China's President Xi Jinping in Singapore on Saturday. But the two leaders will not issue a post-meeting joint statement or agreement, according to a Taiwanese spokesman on Wednesday. The meeting is considered highly controversial yet significant, as the China-Taiwan Summit has never been held since the two split in 1949 at the end of the Chinese Civil War. Since then, China has claimed sovereignty over Taiwan and has threatened military force to counter any move for outright independence. The summit's political sensitivity is highlighted by the fact that each leader will address each other as Mr. Xi, and Mr. Ma, rather than Mr. President. While China-Taiwan ties have been improving in recent years, there are escalating fears of Beijing's growing influence in Taiwan. This is perhaps highlighted by expectations that Ma's party, often criticized for leaning toward China, is expected to lose in the upcoming Taiwan's presidential elections. While some experts say the summit is historic and symbolic, they suggest it holds political risk as well. Professor June Dreyer of the University of Miami says there is possibility of large-scale protest in Taiwan if Ma makes any remarks that hurt Taiwan's independence. Meanwhile, visiting Professor Chung Jung-won at UC Berkeley says the summit will hold no burdens for China's president, as it's being held behind closed doors and is likely to fall short of generating any practical and specific results. Won Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
While Korea's domestic economy is on a rebound thanks to a range of government measures, the country's exports continued their downward streak in October. Korea's Trade Ministry hopes a consumer goods showcase event will encourage firms to diversify their products for sales overseas. Shin Se-min reports.
Drawings of the Joseon Dynasty era, sketched on clocks, hand pouches, and even umbrellas are just a few of the products used daily. Other products with Korea's familiar animated character Pororo and well-known K-pop stars are also catching many eyes.
It's a way for firms to easily approach their consumers using art pieces and famous characters already well known.
Some 500 Korean fashion, home appliance, and health-related product manufacturers attended the Korea Consumer Goods Showcase, displaying products catching the global buyers' attention. The Trade Ministry said global retailers including U.S. Amazon, China's #2 online shopping mall JD.com, and France's Yves Rocher are just a few that attended.
Actually, we are looking for products like whitening products, slimming, and this is something that our customers are looking at in Dubai.
Just last month, Korean exports plunged nearly 16% from a year ago, logging the largest decline of the year. And among the exported products, all sectors, including portable communication devices, showed a significant drop, calling for a need to cater to shifting global demands.
We have to change the structure of our exports, which currently depend largely on intermediary goods, to consumer goods.
The Trade Ministry added that the showcasing event is designed to help Korean exporters overcome dropping global demand and put large consumer markets like China to good use through free trade deals. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The main driver of Korea's economy is exports. Shipments heading out of the country account for more than half of Korea's gross domestic product, but sluggish global demand means, at least for export-heavy companies, their best years are behind them. Our Hwang Ji-hye explains why other industries are upstaging these traditional powerhouses.
Almost half of Korea's 100 biggest listed companies by market cap changed in the past 10 years. And a big chunk of companies focusing on domestic demand, not exports, added their names to the list. Market Tracker CEO Score says among 41 new firms that entered the top 100, 15 were in the retail, food and beverage and service sectors like Kakao Corp, the operator of Korea's most widely used messenger application, Kakao Talk. Firms that failed to stay in the list came mainly from the construction, shipbuilding and petrochemical industries, which have been losing steam in recent years.
Heavy industries that benefited from the former President Lee Myung-bak's currency policy experienced a drastic downhill slide after 2012 and dropped out of the top 100 list.
Experts add that sluggish global demand, coupled with the rising competitive edge of Chinese products against domestic ones, were also factored into the trend, while service sectors were not really bothered from such uncertainties.
Service sectors are also benefiting from easing regulations by the government that aim to foster the industry as the next growth engine. The market cap of those companies is reflecting their potential.
Yi went on to say that the trend is expected to continue for the time being, as exports are widely forecast to remain sluggish next year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The end of the year is approaching fast, and that means not only festivities are around the corner, but also the time to close our books come January. Now, this usually involves a substantial amount of paperwork and confusion for most taxpayers, but a new online tax portal will make the process much simpler without the need to visit an accountant. How so? Our Oh Soo-young explains.
Settling your taxes and going through mountains of paperwork can be a stressful task for the best of us. But New Services in Home Tax, Korea's online tax portal, will allow users to easily manage their taxes simply by logging in. Through the portal, users can preview their estimated tax returns or additional outstanding payments based on their expenditures made by cash, credit card or debit card. They can even compare their tax deductions from the last 3 years by categories, as well as search for useful tips to reduce payments. And starting January next year, during the tax settlement period, the portal will provide estimated tax calculations.
Through this simulation service, double-income couples can decide who should apply for tax deductions for dependents to reap the maximum benefits.
Also, submitting the relevant forms and documents will all be possible online, without having to fill in personal details, as the system will do it for you automatically. With the portal's user-friendly and paperless features, settling your year-end taxes should be less of a hassle. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now for a check on the local bourse, Korea's benchmark Kospi continued its upward streak for the fourth straight day on this Wednesday, closing the session 0.2% higher at 2053. It is the first time in more than 3 months that the index closed above the 2050 mark. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also ended up 0.6%. Now on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency closed higher against the greenback at 1,132 won. Well, this uptick is attributed to an upswing in economic data in the U.S. and Europe and comes despite lingering uncertainties of a U.S. rate hike. Now, although marginally higher after choppy trading session, this is the first time in more than 3 months that the Kospi surged above the 2050 mark. We have Choi Jin-suk economics reporter at SBS-CNBC on the line. Now, Jin-seok, what is it that we saw in the Seoul bourse today? I mean, although just marginally higher, the Kospi did end above the 2050 mark for the first time in months, right?
That's right. So first of all, I would like to talk about how significant this milestone is. The Kospi closed above 2050 for the first time since July 23, which means it has been more than 100 days since the index surpassed 2050. The biggest contributor today was foreign investors who bought more than 115 billion Korean won or 114 million US dollars worth of stocks on a single day, while individual and institutional investors were dumping stocks. By sectors, pharmaceuticals, services, and utilities led the rally. Among blue-chip stocks, Hyundai Motors, KEPCO, Hyundai Mobis, SK Hynix, and SK were gainers, while Samsung Electronics closed lower for 2 days in a row after its 10 consecutive gains recently. In particular, most of the subsidiaries of Hyundai Motors contributed to the rise of the index, boosted by a robust October U.S. sales number that was a 20% increase year-on-year.
Well, Jin-seok, so tell me, is this upward trend here to stay? What's your forecast of the local as well as the global market in the weeks to come?
Actually, expectations for a further year-end rally are soaring. That's because the sentiment of global equity markets as a whole has rebounded significantly. For example, the U.S. stock market has wiped out all but 1.3% of its 12.4% dive during the recent market correction in late August. China's stock market rose more than 10% in October as well. So I mentioned foreign investors were a big net buyer of the Korean equity market today that literally lifted the index higher than 2050. So the so-called risk-on mode among global equity investors due to a sharp rebound of the market is expected to lead at least a slightly more gain to the Korean market until the year end as well.
Well, now for a longer-term perspective, what are some possible headwinds facing Korean stocks?
Right. Of course, we shouldn't be too excited with today's market move, which means the milestone might not have much practical significance. So let me explain why. After the late August correction, global investors found new optimism as China's economic outlook stabilized and the country's central bank cut interest rates. Hence, more quantitative easing measures from other central banks, including the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan, helped lift global equity markets. However, this means there hasn't been much change when it comes to economic fundamentals during the market rebound. That's why some experts are skeptical that the equity markets will go higher from current levels. Secondly, we have to remember we're still waiting for major market events through the end of this week. Fed Chair Janet Yellen will testify at the House Financial Services Committee today, and she is expected to give some hints to the potential timing of the Fed rate hike, which is what the investors are obsessed with. Friday's U.S. employment report for October is expected to grab investors' attention as well. In other words, investors are rather in a wait-and-see mode than putting their money into the stock market quite aggressively. Therefore, it's always good to see the market surpasses key resistance levels, but we can't rule out any possibilities that these events can become potential headwinds for the Korean equity market, even in a short run. This has been...
Go ahead.
Yeah, this has been Choi Jin-seok from SBS-CNBC.
All right, Jin-seok, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Romania's prime minister has stepped down amid mass protests calling for his resignation. Bruce Harrison, of course, joins me in the studio. Now, Bruce, what sparked these protests and why is Prime Minister Victor Ponta stepping down?
Hello, Conn-young. Ponta's government's being blamed for lax safety measures after 32 people were killed over the weekend in a nightclub fire.
But Mr. Ponta wasn't just facing pressure from the nightclub fire, was he?
Certainly not. There was a lot more things going on, but this appeared to be the last straw. Ponta's been at the center of a number of controversies since he was designated prime minister in 2012. And this fall, he stood trial on charges of forgery, money laundering, and being an accessory to tax evasion. It took the cries of thousands of people in the streets for Ponta to finally resign. He'd ignored plenty of calls to step down and vowed to serve until a new prime minister is selected at the end of the next year.
I have an obligation towards the people's constant legitimate discontent and their legitimate wish to extend their responsibility beyond the owners of the club.
Ponta is likely to remain prime minister until President Klaus Johannes nominates a replacement. Johannes had been pressuring Ponta to resign since he defeated him in last November's presidential election. Ponta's cabinet will go with him, and his departure may lead to a political realignment in Romania, where a three-party coalition forms a majority in parliament. A Russian-made cargo plane crashed shortly after takeoff in South Sudan, killing dozens of people. The plane left from an airport in the capital, Juba, and crashed along the banks of the White Nile River. South Sudan's presidential spokesperson said it's unclear how many people were on the plane, but around 20 may have been on board, including crew and passengers. The spokesperson said a number of people on the ground were also killed when the plane crashed where fishermen were working. A police officer said he saw 41 bodies, but added the number could rise. South Sudan media reported there was a crew of 5 Russians on board. A crew member and a child are reportedly the only survivors.
And Bruce, in another news, Amazon.com has challenged traditional bookstores for 2 decades, but now it's opening its own little bookstore. Bruce, why in the world is Amazon going old school all of a sudden?
It's not really clear right now, Conn-young. This is the first physical bookstore they're opening, and it kind of looks like they're just experimenting for the time being.
Right, and they're also employing a lot of strategy as to what's going on their shelves, right?
Yeah, and that's where Amazon thinks it has an advantage. It's going to stock this little store in Seattle, Washington, based on the success of its sales online. The company has a massive database to draw from, of course. The store is simply a physical extension of Amazon.com, and books are selected based on customer ratings and pre-orders. The in-store and online prices of the books are the same as well. Amazon will have its latest tech on hand, too. You can test the Kindle, Echo, Fire TV, and Fire tablet at the store, which will be open every day except Thanksgiving and Christmas. The Seattle Times reports the company's vice president said they hope this isn't the only offline bookstore they open.
Well, you know, that's hard to imagine. I've always enjoyed the smell of books and the library.
Yeah, me too. But you know, it's really easy to travel with an e-reader and cram all those books in just one little digital version, right?
Yeah, well, times change. All right, Bruce, thank you so much for that. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Conn-young.
Well, it seems like the fall foliage is in full swing with the colors of autumn painting every corner of this country. Let's go over to the Weather Center to get the latest regarding the weather. Jihan.
Hello, Conn-young. Yes, it is beautiful out there, and hope many of our viewers are enjoying the autumn colors across the nation.
Right, and the temperatures, they're quite bearable these days, I have to say, but it was rather hazy today in Seoul.
Yes, we are experiencing some dusty conditions these days, and tomorrow will be no exception, especially for the central parts of the peninsula, so bringing a mask with you when heading out is highly recommended. But despite the dust, it was a pleasant and mild autumn day as temperatures were hovering in the 20s, and tomorrow could see a slight drop in the mercury, but it's still above the seasonal average. And this will be followed by sunny skies nationwide, with Jeju Island to receive some rain early in the morning till lunch hour. So please do keep that in mind, and let's move on to tomorrow's temperatures. Daily high here in Seoul will hike up to 18, and Daegu and Gwangju will top out at 19, while Busan tops out at 20. And as for the other regions, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 18 and 21, while Dokdo rises to 19. Much needed rain is in the forecast this weekend, and the precipitation will be moderate enough to relieve the dryness in the air, clear out the dust, and help to ease the drought. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is what you get here in Korea during this time of the year. And that is our broadcast on this Wednesday evening here in Seoul. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Moon Conn-young. We'll see you right back here, same time on NewsCenter.